When the daylight fades and the quiet stirs, we gather in the hush between heartbeats, where stories breathe in the dark. Each tale, a flicker of memory, a dream half remembered, or love that refuses to end. This is Tales Before Dark. Written by Craig R. Mitton. Narrated by Justus McGonigal. Gina Lance, Miss Independent. Regina Angela Larita was born on a stormy night, May 31st, 2002, in Victoria, British Columbia. At first, she didn't seem like she was going to be such a handful. She rarely cried, she never fussed, and she was always smiling. She was a dream come true for doting parents who could have no other children. Then she learned how to walk, and then how to climb, which was suddenly discovered when she attempted to climb a ceiling-high shelving unit in her father's office. Her parents came running in at the sound of a massive crash to find little Gina surrounded by paperback books and pieces of the unit. She was laughing and didn't start to cry until she realized just how scared her parents were. Walking also led to problems. As soon as she was able, she was off on her own seeking adventures. There were many frightening days and nights after she discovered how doorknobs worked. Gina was having the time of her life, even when she was brought home in a police car. When she became a teenager, Gina began disappearing for entire days, which became an issue when it was realized she couldn't even be reached by cell phone. That is, until Gina explained she was heading deep into the mountains where there was no reception. She was always safe. She would always come back, and she wasn't with some boy, but she had been quick to say she was absolutely interested in boys. However, most of them couldn't keep up with her. By the time she graduated from high school, the valedictorian of her class, thank you very much, she was gone most weekends. Her parents had long since given up worrying about her, being alone out in the wilderness. She was always home for holidays and family events, and her wilderness skills were far beyond those of most people on reality TV. Gina attended the University of Calgary after receiving a full academic scholarship to study meteorology. The trips into the wilderness became an issue until she discovered nearby Kananaskis Park in the Rockies. The real reason she spent so much time alone in the wilds was to deal with her restless spirit, and the more stress she was put under, the more restless she became. University was putting her under tremendous stress. It was far from the cakewalk high school had been, and nothing but her best was ever good enough for Gina. In the fall of her second year, Gina found an unnamed peak, climbing right up from the edge of Highway 40. While sitting beside a glacial river, studying for a biochemistry final, she leaned back to rest her eyes and happened to see the peak right behind her. She spun around quickly, very nearly dumping the textbook on her lap in the river. Rock slides had carved a path right up to the peak. It wasn't a trail, but Gina was never one for using trails anyway. It was a way up, though, and most importantly, a way up that would challenge even her. She quickly named the peak Stress Mountain, and every time it just all got to be too much, she would drive out and take another shot at reaching the top. She never made it while in school, but the hike was so challenging and exhausting that it completely drained her of all stress and left her feeling refreshed. Upon graduation, with honors of course, Gina did not go out to celebrate with her friends. She could hardly stay still during the ceremony and left right afterwards, changing in her car in the parking lot. It was to be the day she would conquer Stress Mountain, and she did just that. She landed a high-paying job right out of university, took out a mortgage, bought a cat, and settled into her new life as a responsible adult. The trips into the mountains continued. Although Mount Stress had been conquered, she never climbed it again, but something was always missing in her life. It was during a rather hair-raising winter ascent of an obscure peak that she realized what that was. Just as she reached the peak, the loose rock under the snow slipped out from underneath, and she would have slid all the way down the steep incline she had just climbed. but a muscular arm reached out of nowhere and grabbed her jacket. She was pulled, seemingly effortlessly, to the top. Thus began the ballad of Gina and Lance. She had finally found someone who could keep up with her, and they clicked effortlessly. He was working as a ski patrol at Sunshine Village in Banff National Park, and quickly, Gina found herself commuting between his apartment and Calgary for work. Then the end of the season came, and Lance was out of a job. The chance to become a mountain guide and remain nearby fell through, and the only employment available was ski patrol at a resort in New Zealand. He asked her to come with him, and she thought it over, very nearly saying yes. In the end, she took the responsible path and let him go alone. Long-distance relationships never work out, and with that knowledge, neither of them made any real effort to sustain the illusion. He moved overseas and eventually became just another friend on social media she never really talked to. Gina met Colin through a mutual friend and moved on with her life, trying hard to forget her taste of perfection. Colin was good to her, even if there was no fire that Lance had filled her life with. When the world ended, they were beginning to make wedding plans and live comfortably ever after. Now, fast forward to June 21st, 2030, in Kananaskis Park, Calgary, Alberta. Gina Lance was curled up on her favorite lazy boy chair with a book she wasn't really paying attention to while she absently petted her cat, who was asleep on her lap. Sighing, she set the book on the table and stared out the window at the Calgary skyline. Scratching the cat under the chin, she glanced down at him. "Well, Oscar, what am I going to do with myself?" She frustratingly ran her hand up her forehead and through her thick, shoulder-length, dark chocolate hair. She could no longer deny it. She was in full-scale restless mode. She had to find a way to shake off this malaise and inject some excitement into her life. Gina's eyes flickered to the corner of the room where her exercise gear was. A thought crossed her mind. A vigorous workout might do the trick, but she quickly dismissed it. Her current mood demanded something more mind-stimulating, something she wasn't expecting. It was no easy task to surprise oneself. Her boyfriend, Colin, was out of town on business, would have already sensed her mood and done something to address it before it got this far. "Now, what would Colin do with me?" she murmured to herself. Well, there was one thing that came to mind, but that was, well, not impossible alone, but certainly not much fun without a partner. It was early Friday evening, and she wasn't due back at work until Tuesday morning, so there was nothing to occupy her mind until then. Gina knew from experience that if this mood went unchecked, she'd be a disaster, unfit for human company, by tomorrow afternoon. No, she had to do something. But what? She smiled. The answer lay in having 3 days off. She could be in the mountains in 45 minutes and camp until Monday afternoon, do a little backcountry hiking, relax by a lake, and get some quality sleep in the great outdoors. Yes, that was the key to dealing with this mood. As she stood up, Oscar meowed in protest as he slid to the floor and smiled faintly. Now determined to break free from the clutches of restlessness, Gina grabbed her keys and headed for the door. She could already feel a spark of anticipation igniting within her. A little over an hour later, Gina sat on a fold-up camp chair, cheerfully munching on a bag of baby carrots at her campsite. She had only put up her tent in deference to the fact that she needed some place to sleep before starting a blazing fire. Theoretically, she was waiting for the fire to burn down so she could cook something. In truth, she was never going to let it burn down. Being an avid believer that bigger is always better when it comes to fires, she knew she would never let it burn down to a manageable level. The restless syndrome that had haunted her in the city was beginning to wind down, although she kept glancing over at the lake to her right with a burning desire to throw large amounts of rocks into it. Her mother always said that given enough time, she would throw the entire shore into the lake. The shadow of the mountain to the west of her was beginning to crawl over her campsite when she suddenly became aware of the quiet and stillness surrounding her. She was reaching for a sweater when everything suddenly seemed to cease to exist. Gina flipped her hair out of her face and looked up, suddenly sensing something very wrong was about to happen. Everything had gone completely still, and there were no longer any sounds coming from the forest. Even the cool breeze over the lake had become utterly still. It was almost as if the goddess had reached up and switched the world to the off position. Gina looked at the next campsite to see a muscular man emerge from a tent, looking just as startled as she felt. For a second, their eyes met, and both of their pupils widened. It couldn't be, she thought, but had no chance to hold on to that or any other coherent thoughts. There was a sudden cracking sound that tore over the lake. The accompanying sound waves nearly knocked her over in the camp chair. Starting to rise on her own, she was blown to the ground when an unending, powerful blast of wind tore down the valley. Then the entire world turned on its side. Gina watched the burning logs from her fire fly over her head and fall onto her tent, which instantly began to melt. The land rose and fell in pure chaos, and even the mountains seemed to tilt and fall in on themselves. The shaking never seemed to end, leaving her feeling rather like being stuck in the washing machine on the spin cycle. It then stopped as suddenly as it began. While Gina was in the middle of being thrown up in the air, she crashed into the torn ground and became aware that her nose was bleeding, but otherwise seemed to be sore but unhurt. At the sound of running footsteps, she tried to get up, but failed instantly. A strong and very male hand lifted her to a sitting position and stared into her eyes, which were beginning to learn how to focus again. "Miss, are you all right?" "Oh, God. Gina, it can't be you." For a second, she remembered. "Yep, I'm Gina, and you're Lance." Then she lost consciousness. When Gina awoke, she was somewhat alarmed to find herself lying in someone's lap, someone who smelled very familiar. She rolled to her side and tried to fight off the desire to throw up. What? What happened?" she moaned. The voice was familiar, but she couldn't place it. "Earthquake. A huge earthquake. Although I didn't know what the Big Bang was just before it hit. And the weather is a mess." Gina became aware that it was raining, although she was somehow sheltered from it. Hadn't it been a sunny sky without a cloud in sight before whatever had happened? "Earthquakes don't change the weather. Not this drastically anyway," she murmured. "Oh, that's right. You went to school for that, didn't you?" She slowly turned her head. It really hurt to look up. How did the owner of that voice that was so familiar know that? "Oh, God, Lance!" Of her own volition, her arms reached up over his shoulders, and she pulled herself to his face. Their lips met, and suddenly her head didn't hurt anymore. Not that she was aware of, anyway.